I'm Julie Zenner along with Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
We'll unearth the story of Native American settlement in Duluth's Fond du Lac neighborhood, where a road construction project was halted when human remains were disturbed.
5 years after a major flood caused millions in damage to the region, local nonprofits and government are working to be prepared for the next natural disaster.
And we'll have the week's top business headlines and bring you a story from the news archives.
Don't run away. Almanac North is next. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thanks for watching. And Denny, thousands of visitors are in the Twin Ports this weekend for Grandma's Marathon.
There will be people running all over the place tomorrow. Should be a lot of fun, though.
It should be a lot of fun, and we've got some good stories lined up tonight. Our first guest has spent a lot of time researching our area's Ojibwe history.
That she has. Thank you very much, Julie. That's right. Minnesota Department of Transportation officials have apologized this week for a road construction project that inadvertently veered into an Ojibwe burial ground. MnDOT failed to notify the Fond du Lac Band of Chippewa about the Highway 23 project in Duluth's Fond du Lac neighborhood. If they had been consulted, contractors would have been able to avoid an area known to be an ancient Ojibwe burial ground. Joining us now is historian Christine Carlson, who discovered the road construction had desecrated the graveyard. And Christine, thank you so very much for being here tonight. Can you tell us, how did you discover that the graveyard had been desecrated?
I live south of Duluth, and on May 25th, I came to Duluth and drove through Fond du Lac, and I saw all the road construction there, that they had bulldozed the area. Now, I had heard the Mission Creek Bridge was going to be replaced, and that would have been fine. But to see what they did to right through the graveyard was very disturbing. So I pulled over, got my camera out and started taking pictures, and then I called Ricky Defoe up at the reservation and asked if he'd please say a prayer because of what
Did
I
they
saw.
respond right away to the sites?
Yes, that evening I started scanning my documentation to the band, and then pictures, newspaper articles, and that's what I scanned, and then they forwarded them to MnDOT and different agencies, and then the ball started rolling.
Mm-hmm. So you are kind of the resident expert in the graveyards out there. You've done quite a bit of research on it. What led you to first start exploring this piece of history?
Well, I grew up there, and there were several before me I'd like to mention. There were Mildred Ruschenberg-Baining, Jerome Blazovic, Warren Shea, and Betty Dahl. These people have all been historians before me. So I've done a lot of research and read some of the things that they've done, looked at their pictures. So that's they inspired me, as well as growing up there in that sacred ground.
This area has been desecrated in the past.
Many, many times. Way back, the 1870, the Lake Superior and Mississippi Railroad came through. That was the first time. And that some of the Ojibwe moved their graves up to the J. Cook Park area. And then after that, in 1921, 1932, 1937, when Department of Transportation also put a culvert in Mission Creek Bridge area, and 1937 also was desecration. And many years after, they found burials in different people's home yards as well.
How does something like this happen? The project has been in the planning stages for several years. People in the Fond du Lac community know that history. How does something like this slip by in a planning process?
Well, someone didn't do their research, and a lot of people think that Fond du Lac starts up at the reservation, And it doesn't. The history of Fond du Lac starts at the western end of Duluth. But then there was a treaty of 1854 that created the reservation. But I published my book in 2000. I was surprised someone didn't pick up on that, as well as I've been writing historical articles for the band on a monthly basis for 8 years. So I guess, I don't know.
It sounds like there is more than one graveyard in that region in Fond du Lac. Have all the sites been pretty well documented?
Yeah, there's 3 different graveyards, but they're in the same relative place, you know, just maybe one back a little further. One for the non-Indians, one for the pagan or non-Christian Indians, and one for the Catholic Indians. They kind of separate them a little bit, but through all the digging, I'm sure they've all gotten mixed up.
Talk a little bit about the history of the people who are buried there and what you've learned in your research about the significance of the site.
Well, it's gone back, way back, hundreds of years. You know, the I-90 now is a main thoroughfare. Well, back then it was the St. Louis River. That was the thoroughfare. And so they used the canoe. It was an ancient canoe route for the Dakota, long before the Ojibwe came, and the Ojibwe chased the Dakota out, and it's been Ojibwe ever since.
What has MnDOT promised the band?
Well, that they'll work with them, I hope. I really like to see the agencies work together. You know, maybe they haven't done that. Maybe they've done it a little bit, but they really needed to work with not only Fond du Lac Band, but all the other bands in the state as well, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Because you know, my family is in Oneota. I would hate to see them drive a bulldozer through that area. You know, the cemetery up there. So you know, it's their people that are there.
It sounds like there was a historic review of part of the project, but not the entire project. Is that
I'm
do I
not
have
sure.
that correct? I'm just wondering if there needs to be more coordination between the bands and the State Historical Preservation Society, or you know
No,
how
there
those
should
could be working together a little bit better.
Hopefully they will be now, but I don't. There have probably been bits and pieces. You know, I don't know how this got. You know.
To your knowledge, did the band at all express to the state, to the MnDOT, Department of Transportation, that there are burial sites in there, or to your knowledge, had they not heard of this project coming on?
My understanding that MnDOT did not consult the Fond du Lac Band. That's my understanding. They should have been consulted.
What do you see happening now to try to bring some good resolution to this?
People working together, whether it's MnDOT or the archaeologists, the Fond du Lac Band, the community, the city of Duluth, all people should be working together so that this doesn't happen again.
For the folks who don't really know the layout of the Fond du Lac community, is this a small area of that part of town, where the highway runs as a cemetery, in a relatively small area?
Well, I would say the middle of the cemetery is probably in 133rd Avenue West, but it was probably encompassed parts of that. But right in the middle of town, that's where the cemetery was.
It's never been fenced off or
No.
publicly marked,
No.
so people
Never.
would know it's there.
Never. Nope.
Are there grave markings there, do you know?
No, they're not. But up on the hill there are. There are, you know, some
Yeah.
up with that with the cemetery now that has been leased to the band by the city of Duluth.
What would it take to relocate the graves, or isn't that really something that would be a possibility?
I understand from the meeting at the Fond du Lac Church the other day that some of the remains have gone to Hamlin University, and they'll be, I'm not sure if they'll be studied or looked at there, and hopefully there'd be a marker, and maybe they'll be put back, or some type of that. The band will have to discuss that with the MnDOT.
Sure.
Hopefully there'll be something
Okay.
real nice.
All right, Christine Carlson, thank you so very much for being with us and telling us what you had discovered there.
You're welcome.
Thank
Glad
you.
to be here.
Thank you.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
Most visitors to Canal Park see it from this angle as they take the lake walk. But now you can see Duluth's most famous sights the way the seagulls do, from above. This new park is hidden just above the murals, and while it's relatively deserted now, it shouldn't take long before it's one of the cooler spots near the lake.
You know, a lot of people walk below the upper part here, but I think in time more people will walk up here.
Even we didn't know it was here. Yeah, so we're just investigating.
Just sitting here, it's hard to imagine that this park is built directly over I-35. It's the city planner's newest way of taking advantage of one of the best views in the Midwest.
Doesn't look like they're really done. I suppose they're going to be putting more up here, right? Flowers and stuff. Yeah, it's nice. Real nice.
In fact, there is a bit more work to be done in the area of landscaping. But in Duluth, city projects have a way of getting finished just in time for Grandma's Marathon. So if Canal Park race walking is not your style, this new addition might be more your speed. Lisa Blagan, KDLH News.
It will be 5 years ago next Tuesday when our region was hit by a devastating flood that caused millions of dollars in damage. Highways were washed out, homes were destroyed or damaged, and the Lake Superior Zoo suffered catastrophic losses. In many ways, our region is still recovering from the massive deluge. In an effort to be prepared for the next natural disaster that could strike our region, local nonprofits and government agencies are working to include charitable giving in the toolkit of relief funding. And joining us is Holly Sampson, president of the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation. Dewey Johnson is the emergency response manager for the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office. And David Montgomery is the chief administrative officer for the city of Duluth. And thanks to all of you for being here. Really appreciate. Hardly seems possible that it has been 5 years since the flood. I mean, maybe it's a sign of age, but it feels like just yesterday to me. Holly, what did we learn from the flood 5 years ago that's helping us prepare for future disasters today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Community Foundation has been really lucky to be part of a program called PREP, which is the Philanthropic Preparedness, Resiliency, and Emergency Partnership. So we're now working with 20 community foundations across the Midwest, and we're sharing what are best practices, what have we all learned from our experiences, from the tornadoes in Oklahoma City, to the flooding in the Red River Valley, to the flood we had here 5 years ago. And it's really been a great experience to share what can we all do differently and what can we learn from each other.
Dewey, how do you prepare for an event that hasn't happened?
That's a good question. We learned from past events, which is exactly what we did from the 2012 flood. We also had an event last July of the blowdown area that we've learned a lot. A couple of initiatives or things that we've done since 2012. One is partnering with the city of Duluth on a common public notification system that is coming out soon. City of Duluth had Code Red. We're getting what's called Everbridge now, which will cover the entire St. Louis County. So it will do text message, email, phone calls, and getting the initial word out, especially during disasters, on what people should or shouldn't do is essential. Another thing that we're doing with the St. Louis County and the city of Duluth is going through the state of Minnesota Homeland Security Emergency Management Agency, doing a program called IEMC, Integrated Emergency Management Course. So we're training our public officials on what their roles and responsibilities are in emergencies. We're training department heads and staff on what our roles are. When we open up an emergency operations center, as the city did in conjunction with the county in 2012, what are our roles? What are we supposed to do? And it's supporting the scene, but having those people trained as people retire and turnover, it's important to keep up with that. And those are partnerships that we've done, and also working with the foundation now has been a great partnership.
David, after a major event like that, looking back and seeing what you did well, what could be better, is always kind of an exercise I think that communities go through. What did the experience of the the 2012 flood really reveal about the preparedness, first of all, and the resiliency of our region?
I think the first thing that came through, and it came through very quickly, it's all about relationships. And the city's relationships with the county, with the Coast Guard, with the state, with all the agencies around is what made the difference. You can train, and there had been a lot of training on communication issues and things of that sort. And we did find issues with equipment and did you have the right materials and things like that. But what worked really, really well was the relationships we had between the emergency management teams, between the fire responders and the county and the police force and the sheriff's department, where you could just pick up the phone and call somebody who you had a great relationship with in another agency that cut through a whole lot of levels of red tape or bureaucracy, and things happened.
Mm-hmm.
No turf. There were no turf issues during that flood. Everybody worked together. That was the strength of how well we responded.
Mm-hmm.
We did see shortcomings in some training, some coordination of just not knowing, okay, what should be done when and by who. That has improved over time as we've learned from the flood. But the main thing was that I saw were those relationships and how well they work together.
Holly, there are parts of this country certainly that see far more natural disasters than we do here.
Mm-hmm.
Tornado Alley, there are areas with hurricanes every 3-4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars are poured into those areas when there's been a disaster. Is federal money starting to dry up? Would it be harder to get money? Should we see another disaster like we had 5 years ago?
Yeah, you know, what we've learned, I think, is it's not just about the public sector anymore. So the nonprofit sector and the foundation community is really getting involved today in what's called disaster philanthropy. So Denny, if we think about the flood in 2012, for example, you know, we did receive the public infrastructure designation from FEMA, but of course we didn't receive what's called IA, or individual assistance.
Mm-hmm.
So that pointed the Community Foundation, the Northland Foundation, and the United Way to come together and really say, how can we raise some money? Because we're going to have many vulnerable families. You know, we had over 2,000 households across the region that were severely damaged, and we knew that there would be vulnerable people who would need support. So the three of us working together, we really raised about $2 million as a team that really could go to help those individuals because those FEMA dollars didn't come to the community.
Is that fundraising something that's ongoing so that you are kind of accumulating a pool of resources that would be available at the beginning if another natural disaster were to hit?
So that's exactly as the Northland Foundation and the Community Foundation and the United Way have met together, and of course the Ordine Foundation has been a partner with us as well. That's exactly what we're talking about. We now have funds in place so that we can act very quickly and really get the word out that the need, you know, what the need will be in the community. The other part of the puzzle, of course, is the nonprofit relief organizations like the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, United Way's 211 program. You know, those nonprofit organizations also step forward really quickly to really help people who are in need.
Mm-hmm.
David, because of what we did learn a few years ago and really been learning since then, do you think are officials here and people here more resilient now because of what happened? Or have we learned a lot from that where we know where to turn the next time, maybe a little quicker?
I think we're much better prepared. I think that initial shock response will be better coordinated, will be quicker, will be more sure of what we need to do. Because of those relationships that we've built up through these disasters and these efforts, we know who to talk to and how to get resources into the community more quickly and on a more coordinated basis. And a lot of it is the coordination. In 2012, there was no shortage of volunteers, of organizations wanting to come into the city and help. Our issue was coordinating them and who's doing what. And I think we're much better prepared to handle those sorts of issues as well. So I think we are better prepared, and in a way that creates a better resiliency because you can respond more quickly, mitigate damages, you know, in a better way. I think we are better prepared.
Dewey, you were talking about emergency preparedness, and we have been talking mostly about natural disasters, but you watch the news, and often there are man-made disasters that hit communities with devastating results. Is that part of the coordination that's going on in our region too? Possibly even drawing from some of those other communities that you're working with, Holly, and maybe you could answer to this too.
Absolutely. So emergency management, we approach it as an all-hazard approach. So the structure, the coordination, as David spoke about, really you just kind of plug in the bad thing. So whether it's a natural disaster, a man-made disaster, or whatever, we just kind of follow the same system and kind of adapt to what's happening. One thing that's happened in the region since 2012, actually within the last year, we weren't prepared to house animals. The Arrowhead Regional Emergency Management Association, which is made up of emergency managers in the 11 county Northeast region, has secured a grant, and we now have a trailer which has 48 crates, collars, bowls, leashes to set up an animal shelter along with a human shelter to care for them. A couple of Katrina, people didn't want to leave their homes because they couldn't take their animals with. The state of Minnesota has mandated now that each county has a pet sheltering plan. What are you going to do? Red Cross will let service animals in and companion animals, but that's it. And a lot of people won't leave. So now we have the ability to work in conjunction with our public health department and Red Cross, identify areas for a human shelter, but then also the pet shelter maybe outside, so they can still be together and walk their animals and feed them and be together. That's something that we have not had up in the region, which we do now. There's one other trailer in the state in Anoka County, and now we have the second one, which is housed in St. Louis County in Duluth. But there again, it could be any type of a disaster that this could be utilized for.
We don't, go ahead, Dave.
Well, and just to point out, we've experienced that here, the benzene spill in the early 90s.
That's right.
And it fortunately didn't turn into what could have been a very big disaster, but so it doesn't just have to be storms. It can be train accidents, it can be benzene spills, it can be all sorts of things. The disaster response is similar. The cost is what changes.
I think one of the things that the philanthropic sector and the nonprofit sector has learned through the man-made experiences, but also natural disasters, is if you think about the Oklahoma City Community Foundation, who stepped forward in the bombing of the federal building, or the New York Community Trust that played a really important role in 9/11. Both of those organizations, one of the things that we've all learned is the long-term nature of this work. So both the Oklahoma City Community Foundation and the New York Community Trust are still funding, for example, mental health needs. The people were really affected by both of those man-made
This
disasters.
is long-term, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We think, and with our flood, of course, when we had the FEMA dollars for public infrastructure, people saw that roads were being fixed and the holes were being filled in.
Yeah.
And when the water recedes from a flood, what you don't realize is households still have water in their basements. Households are getting moldy because of the moisture in their buildings, and it really does then come back to when we don't have individual assistance, the philanthropic sector to really step in.
David, how far are we from full recovery at this point, 5 years later?
Well, we incurred something close to $47 million worth of damages. We still have a handful of projects remaining open, probably be wrapped up this year or next year. Stream restoration, creek damage mostly. All of the physical infrastructure, the bridges and the roads have been done, but we're still dealing with some of the creek issues and the cleanup and the stabilizations of creek banks and things like that. A couple of projects remaining. We're probably 98% complete, but there are, again, 5 years out, we still have a couple of projects we're still wrapping up.
Sure. Dewey, the county's developed an emergency management manual. What's that all about?
Really, it's kind of what we just talked about, kind of the forms, and to have everything ready. That we learned kind of some shortcomings about information for individuals, how to apply for assistance, how to make sure we get damage assessment, which is another. We developed a mobile application so we can collect damage quicker and have the numbers to the state. The state wants to know as quickly as we can to get these declarations and stuff moving quickly.
All right, we're out of time, but thank you so much for coming in and filling us in on what's going on 5 years later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's turn now to the week's business news from Business North. Cliffs Natural Resources, which owns or manages 3 Iron Range mines, has selected a site in Toledo, Ohio to develop its first hot briquetted iron production plant. CEO of Cliffs wanted to build the plant in Minnesota using iron ore near Nashwauk, but those plans were dashed earlier this week when the mine site was awarded to Chippewa Capital Partners in a bankruptcy settlement. Cliffs anticipates breaking ground in early 2018 with the production of iron nuggets, which are used in the electric arc steelmaking furnaces, and beginning in mid-2020.
A Tuesday public hearing at Fond du Lac Community College suggests the American Indian community does not support the Line 3 replacement proposed by Enbridge. Some of the same people who protested the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota testified against Line 3. The pipeline would replace a line built in the 1960s with a new 36-inch oil pipeline along most of its route. Much of the negative testimony surrounded a fear that water could be contaminated if a pipeline leaks. Many supporters of the project provided written comments rather than public testimony.
The Superior Douglas County Chamber of Commerce has named Taylor Peterson its interim president and CEO to replace David Miner, who is moving on to Eau Claire, to the Eau Claire Chamber of Commerce. Peterson has been with the Chamber since 2013, directing the Visitors Bureau and member services and participating in economic development initiatives. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Business from the University of Minnesota Carlson School of Management. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
If you have a comment about our show, call now, dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message, or send an email to almanacnorth@wdse.org. And you can check the WDSE website when you're looking for program information, updates on station events, and other news here at your public TV station. Denny, good luck to all the runners this weekend. They're tackling the full or half marathon here in Duluth. Lots of activity going on in town.
Once again this year, I will not be running.
I'm not going to be running either.
All right.
But I'll be watching and cheering them on. For Denny and the crew here at Almanac North, I'm Julie Zenner. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you next time.